Ready Player One, the 2011 book turned 2018 movie, was one of the biggest films to come out in that year. Taking place in a dystopian world, our story revolves around Wade Watts, a teenager who, just like the rest of the world, finds comfort in a virtual reality game called The Oasis, a game where you can be whatever you want to be, do whatever you want to do, and live the life you could only dream of before. The creator of The Oasis, James Halliday, left an Easter egg hidden in the game that contains all of his fortunes to the first person that can find it. Wade, along with the rest of his Gunter companions, Egg Hunter, set out to find the hidden Easter egg while having to compete with the CEO of Innovative Online Industries, who wants to use Halliday's fortune to rule over the entire Oasis. When all is said and done, Wade and his friends beat IOI, find the egg, and can live in the Oasis as they always wanted. Plot's fine and does a good job of building the world and explaining it all, and there's a nice consistent flow and pace when transitioning scenes. You never feel lost or confused, which is great for a movie taking place in such a fictional world. Speaking of Ready Player One's world, it is really fun. It's basically VR chat, but cooler, and they do a really good job of making the Oasis be this awesome world that would be a wonderland for anyone. When watching it, there are so many times you'll think to yourself, I wish that were real, or how cool would that be to do? It looks really good too. If this movie was judged solely on its CGI, it would be a 10 out of 10 masterpiece. It's scary good, almost beyond comprehension. Then you realize that the budget was $175 million, and you think, that makes sense. It'll be decades before this movie looks even slightly dated, and even longer before it's considered a sign of the times, at least looks-wise. The action is phenomenal as well, at least in The Oasis. They take well advantage of all the pop culture references they use to enhance the fun of watching the scene. It really goes a long way. Instead of a character just driving a normal car in the opening race, they're driving the Mach 5, or Bigfoot, or the A-Team van, and it makes watching the action scenes all the more better. And speaking of that opening race, wow, oh man, geez, holy heck, it is godlike and a total blast to watch. I've spoken about it before in my Incredibles video, but I really didn't do it enough justice then. Everything about this scene is legendary. To me, it is peak perfection when it comes to action in films. Everything about it, the track they race on, the references, the CGI, the long camera shots, no music enhancing the sounds of the screaming cars, the chaos of it all, the added conflict of Wade having to hang back so he can fill his car up with gas from the coins of the fallen drivers, trying to beat King Kong to the egg, the T-Rex, all of it, perfection. Absolute perfection. Hands down one of the best opening scenes in movie history. Quote me on that, it rarely gets better than this. The stuff I said about the race can also be said about the finale, with even more references adding to what is already a fun scene. Just like its CGI, if this movie was judged solely on its action, it'd be a 10 out of 10. So, great action, great CGI, and in just my personal opinion, this movie is a total blast. However, the title of the video does say, fun, but flawed. So what are the straws that break the camel's back that I, as an internet critic, the most pristine occupation anyone can have, can't deny, hurts this movie? So I've talked pretty fondly on the references of the movie, but in all honesty, the movie being overflowing with references hurts it more than it helps. When watching it for the first time, it's cool to see all the references and think, oh, I know that thing, or I remember that thing, oh boy, look at all the fun things I remember. But on repeated viewings, that charm fades more and more. They pile on the references thick. Too thick. Rarely anything is subtle either, and this prevents Ready Player One from carving out its own identity because it borrows from a bunch of other movies' identities and giving off a kind of hollow facade that disappears the second you take off the nostalgia glasses. A good example of how to do pop culture references right is Scott Pilgrim. Most of the time the references are sound bites or obscure lines that you really have to look out for when viewing, and it makes the viewing experience more rewarding when you do catch that tiny little nod that went right under your nose all those times before. Ready Player One, on the other hand, uses the references of other films as a hard crutch, and the plot suffers because of it. When there isn't any action, the movie just kind of happens, and the scenes of downtime will really just leave you waiting for the next bit of action to take place, because of how good it is and how the rest doesn't really compare. References alone can't make up for that. The amount of references also infects the writing, and because of that, it really comes off as the writers trying bit too hard to pander to the demographic of young adult nerds. And the love story between Wade and Artemis is really rushed. In the book, it's more believable due to the fact that they spend more time developing it, but since it's had to be compressed into a feature-length film, it isn't fleshed out, and honestly should have been dropped from the plot entirely. The characters are pretty bog standard too. Other than Wade Watts, I can't recall anyone's name without looking it up. no one is particularly interesting, even Wade, and the scenes outside of the Oasis are never compelling really, they're pretty forgettable, and that applies to the select scenes that aren't filled with references, forgettable, and pretty boring. In conclusion, Ready Player One is a pretty run-of-the-mill movie, tons of fun to watch the first few times, but it definitely isn't something you can keep going back to, and eventually you'll probably just resort to watching the best scenes on YouTube. A movie with unforgettable action, insanely good CGI, a great soundtrack that I failed to mention, and neat references, albeit overused, unfortunately falls flat in every other aspect. I recommend it, but you won't feel left out if you never watch it all the way through. And that is why Ready Player One is fun, but flawed. And with that all said, I'm Easily Easy, and I'll see you next time.